And welcome back into another edition of Kolby's Corner, coming to you here live from Blacksburg, Virginia, where it's just starting to feel like fall, and people are already clamoring for the news that is surely to come in the winter, and also more news that's going to come early in the winter with the NCAA obviously laying down its new transfer portal regulations and outlines, which will have a pretty heavy impact on programs like Virginia Tech as they're going through some pretty big transition with the roster. With that said, we'll touch on a lot today in the show, obviously talking about with Babcock last Friday. We had a special edition of Colby's Corner then, talking about the coach first and the GM later, the new transfer portal window, as I just talked about, Montgomery's latest updates from practice today with some injury updates on Stewart, Johnny Garrett, some other guys, how the team's responding after Wake, just the broader mood overall, and just where the fan base and where the team's at right now. So make sure to jump in that live chat on X, on YouTube. Make sure to jump in the chat, ask any questions. We're trying to hit those at the end of the show. Subscribe to the channel over on YouTube and X. Appreciate all the support on this. It helps us out a ton. So really appreciate that. But yeah, jumping right into things. Obviously, the big news last Friday, the coaching search pivot, and also the official announcement of the 8-person committee. Bruce Arians, Bud Foster, Eddie Royal, and then some names maybe some people aren't as familiar with. Bridget Ryan Berman, Lenny Doughty, Brad Hobbs, Ryan McCarthy, and Jay Pearson, those last two obviously being specially appointed from the board. Brad Hobbs obviously served on the board before, donor, other people obviously very well respected in the business sense. But I think starting with that, you get 8 people with very, very strong personalities in a room. We'll see how you come to a consensus. Obviously, very, very different backgrounds between all of them. Each of them have their own interests, different things that they're pushing for. But I think you have a lot of very strong personalities, obviously good Virginia Tech ties, people who have seen it at different levels of football ranks with Bud at the collegiate level, obviously Bruce Arians in the National Football League as well, obviously what he did at Temple, albeit 40-plus years ago. But you have a good mix, but it's just how will you be able to get all those people together? Now, they're going to be meeting a lot here. They've been meeting, obviously, this week a lot intermittently, obviously, as they all have different things going on, not in the same place. So I think they are committed to it. They're hitting the ground running this week. But it's just, what is that going to look like? How do you get all those people on the same page? There's just a lot there because very, very strong personalities, and each of them are going to be pitching their own thing. So we'll see how that goes. Obviously, Bruce is going to have his own list of candidates and just seeing how that all sort of shakes out. I know some people have really lobbied pretty heavily to try and get maybe a search committee in the mix to assist with that process. And there's still, even when you announce that committee, there's a lack of clarity even with the rollout when you hear different executives obviously having different positions in that role. But it will be really interesting to see how they meet and how they keep that process rolling and as they work through different things. Now, like, you'll have that initial list and you've already started vetting some people. And I think really important, I almost forgot to say right there, that's what I was just thinking of. A lot of this, everyone's like, tell us good news. It's been kind of quiet. And I know you're kind of in purgatory right now where the season is where it is. You watch the game on Saturday and you feel uninspired and all you want is good off the field news to sort of marry up with that or just some new updates. Obviously, a lot of these people on the committees and different people adjacent to it have signed NDAs on disclosure agreement. So that's why there's going to be bits and pieces that are coming out. But, when you hear your local buddy over on vtscoop.com saying they heard this or that, just make sure you double check where it's coming from. Now, our boards have been super active, and we're going to drop a lot as we can. Obviously, Terror Dome is going to run tomorrow night. It's a lot of really great intel in there. Just have to tiptoe around some certain things just in the nature of it. But at the same time, a lot is still to unfold. Just really want to emphasize this is still October 8th. One, looking for your head coach, something can look great right now and a job opens. Like this season, and a lot's been made of it last year, would have been a lot more advantageous to fill a job opening as opposed to this year because there's a potential snowball that could build and build and build and roll down and open a lot of very, very enticing jobs. And if you want to be realistic, going back to the season predictions, if you want to be hard but fair, you have to look at where Virginia Tech is positioned nationally in attractiveness of job. I know you just got the massive budget increase. There's obviously a lot going for you. Sounds like they're going to be very, very willing to pay a pretty penny for a head coach. They're upwards of, it sounds like they're going to play, could go to 8 figures potentially if that is the number. I'm not saying that's going to be the case for different people and you're going to overspend for someone, but they sound very, very willing to meet a pretty big number. Same for the coordinator pool. Sounds like it's going to be a very, very competitive, very aggressive coordinator pool. But at the same time, a lot of other institutions are willing to foot that and they're positioned better, and they've been positioned better for years. And it's a more attractive job for other people who are also looking to advance their careers. So that's going to be really important in this process, because there's going to be a lot of really, really quality candidates that are going to be on the list, and probably top targets that are going to go elsewhere. And then I think also to see in that process is, how do you put, not maybe bias, but honestly some bias aside, with obviously your connections to the Buccaneers and your connections to different people in the ACC, or who you just came against, because you're going to see people put up and different people vying for different things just connection wise. But how do you put that aside and sort of just put the common good forward? Because a lot of these people obviously have never hired a head football coach. And this is a really, really big decision at an inflection point for Virginia Tech as an entire university, not just an athletics department. Really, really big. I was talking to someone earlier, and I think they summed it up really nicely. Like it or not, the front porch showcase of your university is your athletics program, especially your football team. So this extends all the way through the athletic department. If you want to be competitive for enrollment in just different facets, you have to get athletics, especially football, right. And I think they understand that. I think the committee understands that. It's just 8 people's a lot with really big personalities, and rightfully so. They've all been very successful in their own fields. It's just, and it sounds like they've been meeting. It's just, where do you get on those vetting different candidates? It's just such an odd process to be in October 8th. You almost can't even believe it because there's still so much to unfold there. But just touching on some different things. Obviously, we talked about on the Friday show, but the top priority is getting the coach first and then the GM, which I know a lot of people were obviously confused about when you have guys like Bruce Arians getting rolled out on the Pat McAfee show, saying they're looking for a GM. That's what we heard before that, so we were rolling that out. So like I said, the information is going to change, but for right now, like I said, it sounds like they're going to be very, very competitive in the pay scale for both the head coach and coordinator, so it's very attractive in that regard. But you have to be very realistic with where Virginia Tech stands in today's current age of college football and how attractive that job is compared to the jobs that are already opening and the jobs that will surely come open here in the offseason. Really going to be big to monitor that, and also trying the best over on vtscoop.com to get you all the coverage. But with NDAs and different things, there will be stuff definitely trickling out, and we'll have it for you very, very close to the source. But it's just going to be a lot slower than I know a lot of people want to come out of this process, as it is so early on. So make sure to go get your VIP subscription for vtscoop.com. You're going to have some stuff later in the week, like I teased with Terradome and different things of that nature. Just had a practice report come out from practice on just some of the notes. We'll get into some of that today as well. If you're just jumping in, make sure to drop your questions in the chat. We'll touch on those at the end of the show. But yeah, I think I said just wrapping maybe a bow on the coaching search before we get into any questions or anything with that. It's a pretty aggressive timeline. You know, around that Thanksgiving time, late November, you kind of want to get those people going in. You obviously have heavy hitters on that committee that add legitimacy to it, talking to agents and different things, but maybe not always from that perspective. But you want to be around that Thanksgiving target. And I think this really ties into that next point pretty big, that the clock is ticking. And when you get around that Thanksgiving time, it maybe changes how you look in your head coaching pool candidate, because with the NCAA obviously laying down that brand new advisory, whatever, committee rules, regulations on that new portal window from January 2nd to January 16th, you have that 2-week window to now only a one-time transfer portal window to go out and get your guys. And for Virginia Tech, they've already seen guys like Dante Lovett, Tucker Holloway, Michael Short, obviously Burgos and Jonkum have departed the program. You've already seen guys left, and it's no breaking news here to see you're going to see a lot more enter and depart at the end of the season. So it's going to be just as paramount and critical for the new coach to come in and be able to backfill not only through the high school ranks in that first week of December for the high school signing day, which is going to be really big if they are an active coach and can bring some of their active high school transfers or, signees to come over to Virginia Tech if that's the route. And then also in that transfer portal window to hopefully bring some of their players. Because if you have even close to the amount that left last offseason, which was still quite a few guys, you're going to have to backfill pretty rapidly in those 2 weeks. And you're already behind the 8 ball with your recruiting and scouting staff not being properly set up everywhere across the country. You're scouting and recruiting consistently all the time. You know, you're looking at who maybe, obviously no one's in the portal yet. They have tabs on all these guys already. They have tabs on Virginia Tech players since last year. And that's just how the business is. So you're a little behind the 8 ball there. So does that change the way you look for a head coach with how it is? Because you can't really afford to punt on next season. It's going to put you behind the 8 ball anyways. But at this time, every year is so critical moving forward for realignment, for so many different things, TV deals. You can't really afford to punt that first year for a head coach. I look at Wake with bringing in Dickert. pretty quick turnaround. Now, maybe not having that big breakout success, but you can't afford to just really be stagnant that first year. So if you bring someone who's been out of coaching, you're going to really set yourself back, not only from the high school recruiting ranks, but also that transfer portal and getting that immediate impact because you only had those 2 weeks to go out and find those guys. With that, I thought it was pretty interesting with the head coaching. They're changing it. So now if your head coach gets fired, once that new head coach is announced, you have 5 days after that to enter the portal. So it's pretty funny the first year that after they're going to institute that is when Brent Pry entered. And then you have the wave of guys entering after with that one-time 30-day window that won't exist anymore. But yeah, it's going to be really interesting with that no spring window because you're going to know your roster there early in January, and those are the guys you got, and that's it. So it's going to be really, really critical, and it's going to move really fast for Virginia Tech hiring a new head coach. However, that GM shakes out that first week of high school signing day and then into the transfer portal. And I guarantee you there's going to be no better place to be in December and January. I'm not going to be sleeping. I remember last December when Xavier Chaplin and all that was going on, getting 3-4 hours of sleep in the transfer portal. There was no one that's going to give you the best cover on visits was actually going down than vtscoop.com because that's going to shape the team for next year. It's going to shape the outlook for the next season and the seasons to come with the new head coach. So a very, very busy offseason, and we're talking about that in October, which seems a little absurd, but it's just the way of the world now. So it's going to be really, really big. I know when you say transfer portal, it gives people the heebie-jeebies because you think about a Florida State team that utilized it so well a couple of years ago, goes on undefeated, wins the ACC championship, and then the next year turns around and wins, 2 or 3 games. So you live by the portal, die by the portal, but you're just not at a place where you can – obviously, you still want to really focus on retaining guys. Obviously, lots been made of a Noah Chambers, a JoJo Krim, Keelan Adams, Jamari DeLoach, these core guys, on the offensive line, like a Kyle Altuner. You want to be able to keep that core of guys, but also have a new head coach come in and bring his guys. And the biggest thing I haven't even touched on is you have to go find a superstar, absolute game changer at quarterback. That is the biggest difference maker in collegiate football at this level. You can have the perfect coaching. You have to go have a guy who can win you football games at quarterback. And there's a lot of guys out there. They're willing to spend, obviously, on the back end with staff salaries. And it sounds like they're going to really ante up for NIL because you understand what that is. Now, dream scenario, if you have a coach come over and they bring a quarterback that they feel pretty enthused about. I mean, there's so many out there. It's almost asinine to throw out names at this point. You'll hear names. The committee obviously has names that they're vetting through, but so much of that is still to play out. So any names you're hearing at this point, really not a valid, just even to bring up. Like you can do deep dives into different people, but at this point that there's so much to play out. But that's kind of where it's at with the transfer portal and the committee and just some of those thoughts, because I mean, that early signing day period from December 3rd to the 5th, and then you have less than 6 weeks really to build that staff, whatever scouting, recruiting, and evaluate, and then have that team sign before winter workouts. So I guess at the end of the day, you're really compressing a rebuild that could take 18 months into 7 weeks. So every day without a coach, you're kind of losing the day in the portal. So it's about picking a builder in that search. So yeah. And like I just said with that, you've obviously seen the departure so far, and there's going to be a lot more at the end of the year. So it's going to be really, really big about retention, seeing what guys you're available, what the quarterback situation is going to look like. That's going to be so massive moving forward. It's going to be a really exciting time covering in the offseason, but there's going to be a massive shakeup. I don't know if you're going to go full UNC treatment where you see 70 guys. I don't want to put a number on it, but it's going to be a massive overturn, and I think that's why it's going to be really important. Just from my perspective, if you know, with these changes, you sort of knew these were coming down the pipe, but I think you really have to find someone who's been in the game. We'll have guys follow with him because you're just not at liberty to bring in guys and develop and let this go 2 to 3 years and get your guys in the program and develop. You kind of have to hit the ground running, and maybe that's not fair, but it's just sort of the way of college football right now. And you adapt or die, and that's why you're taking these big swings with the committee, big swing with these coaching candidates in the portal, because it is now or never, essentially, for the program. Talked about it, you're almost at that point where you could lose a generation if you don't play your cards right. You could lose that base that goes and sells out Lane Stadium. You're just sort of getting to that point where you have to make a big move, and it sounds like they're willing to take a big swing. It's just, are you going to strike out on 3-1, or are you going to go hit it 450 dead center? I think that's where it's at. But yeah, getting into just some Georgia Tech preview. Obviously, there is a game on the field this Saturday. I feel like mostly now it's meta questions about the portal and all, but there is still a game. There's still a team on the field and a lot to watch with that. Like I said, a lot of really young players, a lot of guys that we highly touted through fall camp, and obviously the recruitments over on VT Scoop. But now they're being stepped up to play, especially in that secondary. We've been talking about Caleb Brown. I've asked Philip Montgomery these last 3 Wednesdays in a row for an update on Caleb Brown to officially confirm. Sounds pretty confident that Caleb Brown will not see the field again this year. Sounds like he's probably going to be out for the year with a injury. So you're going to see those guys. Yeah, I think they only have 5 healthy cornerbacks. A couple of those guys are true freshmen. JoJo Krim, Jamari Deloach having to see a lot of time back there. Thomas Williams, I think, played really nice. So getting to really get a great evaluation of some of these guys, especially in the secondary, against a Georgia Tech receiving core that's maybe not where they were a year ago. Obviously, they lost Eric Singleton to Auburn last year, but they still have pretty dynamic pass catchers. And Haynes King presents a threat all on his own. I mean, someone who can obviously beat you with your legs. They hang their hat on running the football. That's what Montgomery said. There's no doubt when your head coach is an offensive lineman, they want to get after you, run the football. And I think Georgia Tech, so much has been made of it. A use case for what Virginia Tech could be. Similar institutions, obviously not in location-wise, but just different ways of reshaping and rebuilding pretty quickly. And I think a big point that people overlook is getting that quarterback right. Well, how does Georgia Tech look in this rebuild under Key if they don't have a Haynes King figure? And I know I'm sort of pivoting back now, but if Virginia Tech can land that quarterback guy, it could change the way you look at it, albeit besides the head coach. Because, I mean, the quarterback is such a big deal. And Haynes King's done that. He carries a load for this team, and I know a lot's been made. If he keeps running the way he is, he's going to be available for the entire season. But he's available right now. And he's playing good ball, running the ball efficiently, not putting the ball in harm's way, super efficient, running the offense. And I expect the same this week. I'll get to my prediction at the end. But I think Virginia Tech is going to go all out and try and stop the run, and I think he can sit back there and pick them apart. You got young DBs that I'm still really high on, but I think he'll be able to sit back there and sort of pick it apart, take what's there, and maybe they don't establish the run game as dominant, but, they can also bring in that passing element, and I think he adds that. You obviously have Jamal Haynes there on the ground. Maybe hasn't got going this season to the way you've seen in the past, but still a very dynamic runner. I know a lot of people will point to that Wake Forest game and maybe playing down to some competition, but overall, this is a team that just still out-talents Virginia Tech in the trenches. They have a good offensive line, a lot of good young offensive linemen, and they've done a really great job recruiting. Maybe that defensive front isn't as dominant as you've seen of some Brent Key teams. So maybe Virginia Tech's offensive line, which a lot's been made of all year, is really struggling. I mean, Montgomery talked about it today. When have they had all the same 5 guys out there? Albeit for all the struggles Kyron Jones has had, and rightfully so, taking a lot of flaming errors on the internet and just all the things. When you look at pretty much every statistic for pressures per drop back, he's well ahead. Power 4, I think pretty much all of FBS quarterbacks on getting pressured per the drop backs. A lot of that is on him, no doubt. Can't acquit him of that. But at the same time, that offensive line has not done him a ton of favors. So how do they do against that front? Does this look more like a Vanderbilt game or Wofford, where you can control that rush, give him some time back there to operate? I think that'll be really big to see. What's Terrence Stewart's health? Obviously, we're just told by Philip Montgomery, kind of day to day. We'll see. Obviously, the availability report will shed some clarity on that later in the week. But what does he look like? How can Virginia Tech get the running game going and try and alleviate some of that pressure on offense? Can Marcellus Hawkins replicate some of that behind the offensive line if they can get going? Can you get the skill guys involved? Can you finally connect with Aiden Green on a consistent clip? Can you spread the ball out and not just check down over the middle? Can you do that against some of their DBs, challenge them, take them on? Can you get drones active and rolling and actually getting out on some runs? I think it'll be really interesting to see that. Georgia Tech's had some pretty decent linebacker play, and I think on the other side, it's going to be really big for Virginia Tech to have good linebacker play because you're going to have to be really, really disciplined in what they want to do. Caleb Spencer's played really, really nice in weeks past. Have had, 11 tackles at NC State, I think 6 against Wake. Jaden Keller obviously had the tip that went to IBM against Georgia Tech. Looked a little banged up, so don't know the health there. But then you have the true freshman Noah Chambers. And I think that was one of the first things I said when I started this show back in fall camp was just height, weight, speed. Looking at him, you knew he was a really great player coming out of Matha. But when he enrolled over the summer, I mean, this was a guy just coming out of fall camp just on the eye test of what we're seeing. It's almost like, how is this guy not on the field to start the year? I know you want to keep shirts and everything intact, but pretty visibly a guy who was leading in that room. And same with Caleb Spencer. going back even into the spring. And I know they brought in Santiago and Short, but I thought Spencer even earned those reps still. And like, it's good to see them now on the field, but it goes back to how were they not out there before? So I know kind of devolved a little bit from the Georgia Tech review, but just spitballing out loud. A couple more injury notes as we were touching on. Johnny Garrett battling through some injuries, but Jaden Muskrat's also close to returning, the Auburn transfer. But talking to Johnny Garrett, this is a guy who like busted his lip open against Wake, and then he got rolled up on his ankle, looked like he was hurt bad again, like he was at Vanderbilt, and then he's back out there 2 plays later. I would presume he rolls. More clarity on that on the availability reports, but I would still presume he rolls, and he adds a lot to that offense, obviously experience-wise and just everything, sort of being that stalwart. Keller, like I said, I would presume he goes, obviously a little banged up there. With Caleb Brown out, you're going to see a lot of young guys rolling. I think Thomas Williams played good and the true freshman, but I think they're going to get tested because if Georgia Tech doesn't establish that run and they sell out to stop the run, I think Haynes King can step back there and get the ball to some pretty good skill guys back there. And then at the end of it, talking about the quarterback position, obviously Drones is taking a lot of heat. I'm not sure, and I don't think they're going to make a change to this game. But Montgomery was asked at the end of his press conference or availability today just about Pop Watson in general. I think it's valuable to say that, Montgomery, I think, quoted saying he's been great, has a great mindset, knows where he's at in the offense, is developing, pretty much to that effect. So, obviously I'm not expecting a change, but sounds like Pop's keeping a good mindset, and that's what you're hearing. It'll just be really interesting to see the quarterback situation moving forward in the year, how the offensive line plays against Georgia Tech. And there's just so much. I feel like there's so much inconsistency with Virginia Tech this year from week to week. Can you really draw any comparisons? I think one thing you can fully expect from Georgia Tech's defense is they're going to blitz you a lot. I think that's one thing that you're going to see from the way defense is going to play Virginia Tech's offense throughout the entire year is you're going to get blitzed a ton and see if you can hit the one-on-ones with skill guys, see if you can try and establish a run game with that. But you're going to get blitzed a lot. And how do you deal with that? So I think that's some points to look at in that game. We'll be down there in Atlanta for VT Scoop, giving you all the coverage. Should be a good time going back down to Atlanta. I'm going to have a lot of coverage and hopefully keep everyone in the loop with some good different game day things. But more to come on that. So make sure to stay tuned into the socials at Kolby_Crawford with content coming from Bobby Dodd and around the area. So with that prediction for the game, I said it on the pod earlier before I officially write it. But like I said, I think Georgia Tech just out-talents this team. I think Virginia Tech has shown the inability to execute on the basic details. Obviously, going back to Wake Forest last week where they only had 6 penalties, but it was for 70-something yards and at very, very critical times. It's just two teams at different, stock on the rise with Brent Key looking like a team that could go play for the ACC championship in Virginia Tech, interim head coach. Obviously, seniors still playing for a lot, guys still playing hard, but just at crossing paths. I think Georgia Tech's offense will be able to take what they want, maybe in a different way than they've done all year, and Virginia Tech's offense is going to be pressured all game. I don't know if Stewart rolls, and if he does, I don't think he's going to be all that effective. I don't know if you get that run game going. Drones is going to be under pressure. I'm seeing like a 34-13 game where Georgia Tech can kind of dominate and do what they want, and I just don't see Virginia Tech's offense being able to go up and match points. I think you might see some decent play out of Virginia Tech's defensive line, but I think the skill player for Georgia Tech can put him over the edge, and Haynes King will have a pretty solid day, as you would expect out of a, 5th, 6th-year guy at quarterback and someone who's been doing it for a really long time. And I think Georgia Tech could be well on its way to Atlanta. I know they have the test against Duke, and there's a lot moving on in the ACC, but this is a team that I don't think is that high caliber, but just with their schedule and the way things shake out, I think they're still in a class above Virginia Tech and a lot of the teams in that middle of the ACC. So just some more big picture stuff. Like walking out of the game, just some notes on it. The fan base, you saw a couple people walking out angry, and I joked about it with Doug Bowman earlier, where he had the tweet of ripping your shirt off after your team loses and saying you're over with it. I saw some of that, but a lot of it was just pure apathy. That, and when you see parents going in with kids or younger people and they're just fully unengaged, it's almost like you're seeing the lost generation right before your eyes. And I think that's why it's so pivotal right now with the head coach, with the restructuring, with all that, to try and regather that back in. Because once you lose that, it's really, really hard to get it back. And it's not something where it's just one 10-win season. and you're back. It's something that really takes time, and that's why you have to lay a good foundation because, I mean, so much I feel like you've heard Witt and different people over the years or just in recent years in interviews say, man, they keep filling it out. They keep filling out. We have to produce because this is this and that, and they won't always do that. And I know it's always felt like the last thing was the breaking point. Fuente was the breaking point. Now Pride, but you only get so many chances at this deal, and you're kind of backs against the wall and running out of time. So this next month is going to be super interesting. We'll have a ton more clarity in the next few months. I know it feels like sap just dripping down a tree bark as the information's dripping out. But as we're getting it over on vtscoop.com, we're giving you what you can, what we can, and what's valuable. Trying to weed out. Obviously, a lot of people are saying a lot of things. Everyone's talking to a lot of people. My buddy heard this. My buddy heard that. But just for clear message, go over to vtscoop.com. We'll have a ton of stuff, nuggets, great stuff in Terror Dome tomorrow night, different things. So like I said, it's not an overnight fix, but the framework is being built, maybe on a little shaky foundation with some of the committee and different things, but the new budget, the new process, there's new urgency. So now it's just about the execution. So you don't really rebuild with a culture with the headlines like we're sort of even doing. You do it with alignment. And I don't know how that shakes out in the future, but I think that's pretty clear. Alignment is the word of the year, the word of the decade for college football. For the first time in a while, Virginia Tech feels like at least it's trying to make a conceited effort to try and find that alignment. Will they? Not sure, but we'll be here to cover it. Along that, a couple of notes before we sign out. Well, before we get into questions and sign out, it sounds like the university is going to do some. They're looking into some things. They got some assets, and looks like they could be doing some things with assets to try and get some of that money for the athletics budget. Not going to go into too much more of that now. Probably have some of that trickle out on the site, but they do have some assets in places that they could potentially offload and get a pretty penny for and sort of backfill and supplant some of that into the athletics fund. Can't say too much on that right now, as it's still pretty early on, but there's some things there. They've obviously been coaching. It's very early, but vetting some coaches, some names on that over on vtscoop.com. Some names that have been heavily lobbied for on vtscoop.com have been vetted and looked into. Everyone's got question marks. So that'll be interesting because what looks so great to a fan base and maybe even the consensus on the board, there's a lot behind that. So money's on the table, some structures in place, and the time's getting shorter with the transfer portal and different things. So if they land the hire, this is the bottom, not the blueprint. But if they don't, you get stuck in the same cycle. So with that, we'll get into a couple questions before we sign out of here on a Wednesday night. Appreciate everyone jumping in here. Had Lance say, please tell us some good news, Kolby. Hopefully there was a little bit of good news mixed in there. I know it wasn't a lot, but we'll see. You got to land the head coach, and we'll see how that shakes. I feel like, but you can feel pretty confident about a new guy coming in and retaining some of this good talent. I think if Virginia Tech fans or anyone can hang their hat on anything, it's going to be trying retaining some of the guys you got here and how they're going to be able to do that. And either way, I mean, hopium is a hell of a drug, and people will take it and inject it all offseason long going into the season, no matter who the head coach is, whatever the roster looks like. You can sell yourself on any transfer edition. So it's going to be interesting to see how all those pieces fit. But I think people are going to have a lot more reservations as in years past because, they've been burned a couple times. So just hang on for the ride. But I think obviously some good news. It can't get much worse. Well, actually you can. Look down Tobacco Road. So that's what I was joking with someone earlier. You think you're at rock bottom, you can always go a lot lower. So Yet Spees, a big donor last week, and told me that Gruden is an actual candidate and has somewhat separated himself from the pack. I feel like that would be a disaster. Any truth to this, he's always in the know. Gruden's name is going to come up. I've heard it come up. But like I said, agents talk, different people talk. I don't know. And like I said, it's super early, and I'd be lying if I was like super definitive on that. Everyone's a big donor at this stage. No offense. There's a lot of people who say that, talking to a lot of different contacts. But like I said, I think you're going to see that emphasis. Gruden's been out of the college game for a couple decades now. Obviously been out of the NFL now for close to 5 years. It's going to be very, very imperative to go out and land people who have recruited not only the high school ranks recently, but especially the transfer portal and bring guys over. I think Gruden could have really early returns in the portal and high school ranks, just like Bill Belichick kind of did. But you saw he went out and just got guys. Didn't go out and exactly get top guys. So while you have that name brand, obviously the social media brand with these built with Barstool and Jake and all those guys and doing a great thing, I'm just not so sure that's what you hang your hat on. You've just seen different use cases of taking that big swing for sort of off the wall personality. I don't really foresee that coming to fruition. I think it would excite a lot of the fan base. I think a lot of people would definitely have reservations about it, and probably rightfully so. But it's still very early. Not going to discount anything. His name will definitely be involved. I'm not sure how far that will go, though. So that's my take on it. Like I said, not 100% backed by everyone's obviously like, oh, it's all just opinion based. Yes, that's opinion based, but also there's some pretty heavy comments from people pretty high up the chain on that. So we'll see how that shakes. Why would a coach come here without knowing who their boss is? Need to hire a GM first. Yeah, you can go back and forth on this. Being a head coach at the Power 4 level at a really high level, you're going to be one of the most competitive personalities, type A, someone who, to get to that level, to have that success, you're just going to have a chip on your shoulder like no other. You're going to be so ultra competitive that it's your way or the highway. And a lot of these people feel that way. So you don't want to limit that pool by bringing in someone that they're unfamiliar with, that they don't jive with. I know people feel a certain way about this and you don't know who your boss is going to be. I know Witt in his interview pointed to Ole Miss where you have a real 50-50 split, but down at Ole Miss with Lane and their GM. But is that true? At the end of the day, Lane's going to have that say at Ole Miss, right? So it's a different situation everywhere. At first, you heard signs that they wanted to go to the Stanford model. Stanford's different because you have Andrew Luck there. He's kind of the stalwart of that program, right? Like what he says is going to go. So much it's to shake out with that GM and whatever the athletic CEO, however they go with that. I think, a lot's made of that GM and rightfully so, because you've had a really, really, really bad one in the chief of staff here for a while, who has, whatever, that scouting department, recruiting department, and everything understanding of the GM here. Anything will be an upgrade there. He's talking to contacts around college football. It's pretty insane, but it's going to be really big to land that and then also completely rebuild and flesh out the scouting department to get on par and not be, I thought it was funny. You didn't want to be on the bleeding edge, but you have to be on the cutting edge because right now you're 20 steps behind even the closest competition on a lot of things. And that's no place to be if you want to compete year in and year out. So I know some people feel that way, but you got to land the head coach first. At the end of the day in college football, the head coach is still going to be the front runner of the program, the guy that the recruits look to. You can have a really, really effective GM on the back end. You look to Courtney Morgan at Alabama, who still makes pretty coin what he does and interfaces with the recruits a lot. But at the end of the day, on Saturdays, when you pan on the field, it's still the head coach. So I think that's the thinking. I think they could have done a lot better in the rollout of why they wanted to do it that way. But that's where they're at. So, you got to live with it and make the best next decision. I know this is going to be an unpopular opinion from Thomas Train, but I think if Fuente would have had the resources and support, he'd have been successful here. Definitely before my time covering the team, so I just need to make that abundantly clear. Don't want to speak out of turn on a lot of things, but and just talking to people who have been around for a while, obviously was a good ball coach, had success at Memphis, but maybe wasn't properly resourced. And at the same time, to be the devil's advocate, probably didn't put in the exact effort with the donor base, with going out and building relationships with high schools in the region and just in general. So it's a mix of both. You have to be properly resourced, which Virginia Tech has put the backing behind. And now you have to find someone who's willing to go do all that legwork. You can't just coach on Saturdays. You have to, if you sign up for this role, you got to be Monday through Sunday, not a Monday through Friday or Monday every day except Saturday or just Saturday. You have to do both. And, a lot of people like, oh, just go get a straight ball coach and let the GM handle all of that. You could do that, but, you kind of need someone who can wear all the hats, I think, at least at that head coaching position. Because at the end of the day, they want their say. If you want a head coach worth their salt, they're going to want a say on their personnel on different positions. And, you deserve that right if you get to that position. So it's all kind of a cluster as college football evolves into the NFL model. A lot of people are still trying to figure out how that's going to look. So I think that's just the growing pains you're seeing. But yeah, the Fuente deal, obviously, I think pretty unequivocally was under-resourced in its time here. Okay, let's see this one from Eustace Frederick III. If you were VT Chief Football Office, Kolby, okay, all right, let's take that salary. and you had to choose, would you say VT would do better to take an A+ ace recruiter, or would VT do better to ink a masterclass pure coaching savant? Why? Great question. You looked at Fran Brown in Syracuse, whose name's come up. Heard someone on the obviously he's going to be on that list. You know, a lot of these names, any hot coaching candidate is going to be on that list from the committee and just brought by different people. Fran Brown is one of the best recruiters ever, probably in college football. And, you know, look at what he's done to Syracuse, bringing in a 5-star in the 26 class, the guys he's brought over there now through the portal at a school that's not exactly that premier destination, and punching above his weight class. And look how that's turned it around. I mean, so much is made at the collegiate level. The talent discrepancy. In the NFL, everyone's going to be good. In development, you know, like, but in college, you really have to have really talented players, and the skill discrepancy is so big. But at the same time, you have to be able to coach on Saturdays. Honestly, right now, I think VT, like, you want to have a mix, and like ideally you have both. And I think there's options out there that could do you both. Out of the given ultimatum, I think, you know, the masterclass pure coaching savant is good. And then you can fill that out. And honestly, if you build out the scouting and recruiting department, like you're talking about, like you should, you know, they should be able to get you the personnel to go coach up and win on Saturdays. So I think that's where you're kind of at. That's my take on it. But yeah, if you want to be at me in contact and be the CFO or what are you talking about, chief of staff over there, yeah, let me know. I know a lot of people over there wouldn't like that, but whatever. Last one from Thomas Tran before we probably head out of here. Appreciate all the support, everyone. Make sure to like the video, subscribe to the channel. Mondays and Wednesdays at 8:30, right after whatever time the game is on Saturdays, here on Kolby's Corner. Just shooting from the hip. James Franklin is the biggest recruiter type, but his assistants get hired away every season. It seems those guys had to be really good X's and O type corner. Yeah, I think a really good one that you look at right now is Manny Diaz, someone who was obviously the head coach at Miami, goes back up to Penn State, and now is at Duke, and he's receiving interest. I think that's a hot name to even look at in this search and different searches, Manny Diaz. So, yeah, he's done a good job of building out that tree. Definitely something to monitor with that name and just different things. But, yeah, I think that'll do it for the show tonight. I appreciate everyone jumping in here. Been a ton of fun getting this all going. Make sure to, like I said, subscribe to the channel, like the video, follow over on X at Kolby_Crawford. Gonna have a little bit of content coming out at the end of this week. Making the fight, you know, with the way the season's gone, making stuff interesting. Obviously, still a whole lot to play for with a lot of these guys. So keeping updates on that. Headed down to Atlanta this weekend. So make sure to stay tuned into the coverage on vtscoop.com. But yeah, that'll do it for tonight. Make sure to like, comment, subscribe, share the show with a friend. And yeah, have a great rest of your week. Enjoy some dinner. Enjoy some playoff baseball. Safe trip down to Atlanta if you're going to the game. If not, enjoy just the slate of college football this weekend. Just an absolute blessing to be here with college football and everything going on. So yeah, appreciate y'all jumping in here. Have a great rest of your night, great rest of your week, and God bless. See you next time.